Welcome to 5 and 5 from the One-Stop Co-op Shop, where we discuss 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today we're looking at Proving Grounds from Renegade Games. Quick disclosure that I did get a review copy of this game. Proving Grounds is a solo-only, real-time dice game. It's the first game in Renegade's Solo Hero series, and Warp's Edge that we covered recently on the channel is going to be the second. I tend to be a pretty big fan of real-time games in general. Did Proving Grounds continue that trend? Let's find out and get to the list. Our number 5 is a fairly minor element, but still a pro, and that's the enemy abilities on the enemies you're fighting in the arena. Each enemy has different requirements on the right side of its card that show how many dice in sets you need to move up their track and eventually defeat them. But about half of the enemies have special powers on top of that, like certain dice being more useful against them or less useful against them. You even get some really tricky ones that'll hurt you if you ignore them for the round. Now, there aren't that many of these special powers, so you might wonder why this is a pro, but it's because the game is so frenetic and crazy in the real time. I don't want too many powers, and they struck just the right balance of enough without it being overwhelming. Speaking of the real-time chaos, my number 4 is a mix, and that's how the real-time is handled in the game. Unlike many real-time games like Escape or Magic Maze or 5-Minute Dungeon, this one is not continuous real-time. You have little bursts of 1-minute actions. Now, I'm calling this a mix because I think it might not appeal to some players. They might not want to do the 1 minute of real-time and then, kind of switch back and forth between that and activating the dice. For me, though, it didn't really bother me. I found the real-time to be fine, and especially with the free Renegade app, they have a little timer that will work within the app and also has kind of thematic music. So I think it's okay, but again, some people might not like it, so it's a mix overall. My number 3, though, is my biggest con with the game, and that's how long it can take and the fact that sometimes you have turns where nothing is accomplished. The basic idea of the dice rolling in the game is that if you roll singletons, enemies can hurt you, and if you roll doubles or more, then you might move them up and attack them. But enemies have very specific requirements to move up their tracks. They might need 4 dice of the same number. So there will often be times where you rolled well enough to not get hurt by anybody, but you didn't roll well enough to actually move them up to being defeated. Now, this happens a few times, it's not a big deal, but if you're just doing 1-minute real-time rounds over and over again and not killing anybody, this game, which should be pretty light and quick, can sometimes overstay its welcome. Not usually, and especially with some modules, not almost ever, but it can definitely happen. And speaking of modules, they're my number 2 and a big pro for me. The game includes 6 different modules that you can mix and match. Some of them make the game much harder, some make it much easier, and some are kind of in the middle. And I really enjoy the power this gives to the player. You can make it as tough as you want. I mean, watch my playthrough from yesterday. I put in 2 of the harder modules and it didn't go very well. But you can also fine-tune the experience. If you want it to be more strategic and make some numbers worth more than others, then the Sun and Moon module works really well. If you want to have some more mitigation and not feel like the dice are controlling your fate, then the Dragon module is awesome. I just really like that they took a game that they could have packaged as one set thing and really gave the player a lot of control over their experience. But my number 1, a huge pro, at least for me, is how the dice rolling works and how much of push your luck is in the game. Like I mentioned, singletons will generally hurt you with enemies, and pairs or better will help you, but the thing is you can only re-roll pairs or better. You can only re-roll the sets. So there's so many times in the game where you really want a certain number, or you really want to finish off a certain enemy, but to potentially get the numbers you need, you have to re-roll something that's already a guaranteed hit, and, force yourself to maybe become vulnerable to tons of enemies. That combined with a 1-minute time just makes the game so tense, and at least for me, someone who loves tension in real-time games, it is such a fun experience. Overall, I wasn't sure whether to expect much from Proving Grounds. I'd heard kind of mixed things on Board Game Geek. But again, at least for me, a big fan of real-time, I think this one is awesome, and it's definitely going to stay in my collection. Now, warnings to some players: if you don't like real-time, stay away. If you don't like the tension of real-time and kind of the craziness, stay away. And if you're looking for really deep strategy, you're not going to find it here. Even with the other modules, a lot of the times you're just like, hey, I don't want to roll singles, I want to roll pairs. You don't even care which numbers sometimes. So it's not like a major strategic game, it's just a lot of fun. A final note, and I might be the only one that feels this way, but I think the silly dice rolling mechanics really lend themselves to the actual theme of fighting. Like when I roll that singleton, I can imagine that enemy who's surrounding me is creeping in and I see him about to attack me and I have to, cancel my attack against another enemy, pull my sword back to try to defend against him. That's sort of what like re-rolling the sets represents in trying to avoid the singles. So again, I don't know if anyone else will feel that way, but when I think of it, it really feels like it captures this idea of a desperate multi-opponent battle in the arena well. Good gaming, everyone, and I'll see you at the next stop.